Welcome back to The Full View. So, while Thabo Bester is back behind bars for now, questions remain as to why he was allowed to live large for months after authorities were first alerted to the fact that he had escaped. Bester escaped from the Mangaung Correctional Centre in May last year by faking his own death. Government knew of the escape at least by October last year, but there was no alert, no manhunt launched. Prison's Inspecting Judge Edwin Cameron said he had spoken and written to Justice Minister Ronald Lamola about Bester's death in custody and evidence of G4S collusion in October last year. That's the company running the prison. Eventually, he alerted journalists at GroundUp. To discuss, we're now joined by criminologist Professor Nirmala Gopal. We're also going to talk about the fact that Home Affairs says there is no record of this man. He was never registered. We're joined by specialist immigration lawyer Ashraf Essop. Thank you both for your time today. Let me start with you, Professor. An escaped convict, there's so many players here, but I would think that for an escaped convict, the police are important. The Justice Minister was alerted, but there was no manhunt. He said he did speak to the National Commissioner. Then we heard from the Police Commissioner in Parliament. Does what he says hold water for you? He repeatedly said that police kept quiet because they didn't want to basically jeopardize their investigation. Blow cover, etc. So they remained mum.
Good afternoon, good evening, Francis, and good evening to your viewers. Yeah, I think it's just such a complex situation, such a complex case. There are so many, like you say, there are so many actors actually, because it seems like a movie that's playing out in front of us, and well, of course, various role players. I think one of the difficulties is that, yes, while you have the Ministry of Police, and then you have the Ministry of Justice, and of course your Minister of Correctional Services. And whilst on the one hand, I understand that they may not, the Department or the Ministry of Policing did not want in any way to prejudice the investigation. I think there was still an obligation and a duty for that particular ministry to work collaboratively with the Department of Correctional Services, because I mean, once he had left the Correctional Services premises, he then became a criminal on the run. He was a fugitive, and that meant that you needed the services of the South African Police Services. But I think in all of this, like I said earlier, it's a complex situation. There is just this lack of wanting to take responsibility, accountability, and liability for what has played out and what has actually become a really embarrassing situation for the South African society.
Yeah. Because, I mean, even if there was justification here, he said they feared alerting Thabo Bester and potentially blowing their complex investigation. But like you say, there wasn't collaboration. Home Affairs didn't know. There was no alert at ports of entry in and out, even if the public wasn't alerted. But does it sound like much of an investigation was going on to you anyway?
No, seriously, my own naive theory is that I suspect that all of these ministries didn't expect this kind of outcome. And if we didn't have this outcome, then it would have been much easier to just sweep matters under the carpet. So now that it's out in the open, individuals have to find ways to protect themselves. And I think that's the narrative that's being played out at the moment.
All right. Mr. Essop, you are focused on immigration. I mean, let's just start with the latest revelation that Thabo Bester simply doesn't exist according to Home Affairs. He has no ID number. He wasn't registered. He only entered the system, as it were, when he entered prison. Hearing the Home Affairs Minister speak today, it sounds like that isn't an unusual situation. It sounds alarming, but it's apparently not so unusual in this country.
I heard the minister say so, but one has to start on the premise that the Department of Home Affairs is sole custodian of our identities, of each and every person in the Republic. As the Minister has outlined, it encompasses both citizens, visitors, and asylum seekers. So it is really their prerogative to maintain, manage, and basically distribute information, if requested, on a particular person. Now, how do you go about getting a South African identity? Well, usually at the age of 18 or 16, you apply for an identity document. But the journey starts long before. It actually starts at date of birth. In this case, we heard the Minister saying that he actually went and followed up the person that said that she was the mother. He consulted hospital records. He then consulted school records. So the curious thing is, how did the particular person then even obtain a South African identity without it being registered or captured by the department from these various avenues, which is starting with your birth certificate? Now, we know since March 2013, there has to be an unabridged birth certificate that has replaced the old birth certificates and the old ID books. And basically, the Identity Act itself says that they intend to provide for a compilation and maintenance of the population register in respect of South Africa, because that goes to a number of rights, as you would see, as you'd imagine, writing matric, applying for a bank account, going for a driver's test, or in this case, curiously, he had a passport, otherwise he could not have been deported from the country in which he was in. This is a travel document. So one of the things that the accused is now saying, but the identity numbers doesn't match. But as we know, now we go back to the quandary to say, but the sole custodian of all of these documents is the department. So one can't reconcile really the two views.
So, look, the Home Affairs Minister has explained that his mother did not register the birth. Apparently, he was able to go to school through an employer. They didn't ask questions. Then later, she got her own documents and she registered her other 3 children, but he had already left home. That was when he was 16 or so. In Tanzania, he was then found with a US passport in the name of Tom Williams Kelly. So this is really convoluted. But a question for me is, when he entered the prison system, surely there's no match. So, okay, we realize there's a prisoner with no ID number. At that point, Home Affairs should start some sort of record because, of course, criminal records are also linked to your identity, linked at Home Affairs. So nothing was done then, and you're allowed to enter the prison system without an issue that's obviously taken place your whole life not being corrected.
I think there the minister has given a explanation saying that he's consulted with somebody in the legal industry for 35 years who says it's not unusual for persons to pass through the justice system without a registration or an ID. But here's the part we can't get away from. When they register the death of the person, this can only be happening with specific officers of the Department of Home Affairs. Only they can register the deaths, and this is a system that goes a little bit deeper. Even funeral undertakers have to register the death. But in terms of the form, the notification, it has to be reported by somebody, the person reporting the death, also the medical practitioner that has reported, as well as the Home Affairs official. So it's not just going into prison. In this case, when the body came out or when the death was reported, there were other ancillary documents that needed to follow that. But more importantly, you realize that in terms of recent legislation, the protection of identities in terms of POPI, that demands that we have a proper identification system, because the subjective interest of an individual, like their likeness, image, voice, and other distinctive personal attributes are captured there.
All right, Mr. Essop, I'm going to stop you there. I mean, we haven't even got to the claims that he actually was able to open bank accounts. We'll follow that up. But last question very quickly for you, Professor, because we're running out of time. We were talking about the The evidence that the police minister said there was an ongoing investigation, they didn't want to jeopardize that, but the evidence suggests that not much of an investigation was done. What do you make of this? The police had not even spoken to Dr. Nandipa Magudumana, the woman who actually went and said, I'm his wife by customary marriage and I want the body. She had actually gone to the prison.
So my view on this is that, and sadly and unfortunately, the police services, and it's not necessarily something that they'd like to hear, but in terms of the effectiveness, they're just so low in South Africa at the moment. And I think that's just one of their traits. Not wanting to invest and not wanting to investigate these kinds of issues. And I think, yeah, you're right. How could they not have spoken to or investigated Nandipa?
Yeah, all right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much. Just looking at some of the revelations that have come out, some of the grilling that has taken place in Parliament. That was criminologist Professor Nirmala Gopal and specialist immigration lawyer Ashraf Essop.